Hello.
Give it one more minute, see if Yakov is able to join. Yeah, here he is.
Hi.
Hey, so yeah, let's get started. So since the last meeting, I know that Yakov did a lot of work on his implementation, where now we have a version where the response looks a lot like it did in our previous iterations, where the response shape matches what the defer fragment looks like, but without any branching and with deduplication. Jakob, are you able? Do you want to go through your solution a little bit and show some examples, maybe? Or I can do it if you're not able to. All right, maybe I'll just share my screen then.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a little only able to listen today, unfortunately. But yeah, if you're able to, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so here's some examples. This is the one that we've looked at for a while, and because E and F is sent in the first payload, it's not sent in the second one. There's an example with null bubbling, and I think that's null bubbling is definitely a tough issue for us to figure out. But in this example, so we have A, B, C, and this field that nulls and is non-null. So first, the defer for here is sent down to D, and then in a later incremental payload, since this field has nulled out, C is sent again with null and the errors. Yeah, and I think this is another similar example that we were showing. So for this meeting, I think maybe we have on the agenda for the main working group that's coming up on Thursday to talk about this. And so I would like to get a sense from everyone else if we want to move forward with Benji's proposal that we talked about last week or something more like this. Yeah, so anyone have any initial thoughts?
Sorry, just to add one line to that. The basic idea is that with my proposal, we are sending like individual fields to each payload and then building the payloads when they're complete. And so we have control over whether what to do about nulls or not. So basically, it only solves the one problem that we had of executing each field once, but it doesn't give us consistency necessarily in terms of null bubbling. It could or it could not, whichever approach that we would decide here today. So it's more like an implementation. It doesn't necessarily contradict any of the other proposals.
Yeah, the main difference is that we're keeping the consistent shape of the payload. I guess consistent's not the right word. We're matching the shape from the fragment that was deferred, versus in Benji's approach, where we are splitting out the we're not trying to do that, and the like the higher up fields that are sent first, we're sending patches on top of those instead of resending like the object types that have overlapping deferred fields. Does that make sense?
To clarify, because I missed like the beginning of a call. So Yakov's version implement deduplication, right?
Yes.
And so in payload, all the leaves mentioned once. What about intermediate objects? Yeah, so intermediate objects duplicated, but leaves are deduplicated, right?
Yeah, I think it's only the intermediate objects that have it's not only leaf fields are deduplicated, it's only the ones that are needed to maintain the shape of the response to correspond to the fragment.
Are duplicated. Okay.
Right.
So there, yeah, but they cached. So they execute once, but they like, okay. When I'm totally for it, like, because I'm see, it's, I don't treat it as an end goal. I treat it's like incremental step in the right direction. Because like both Rob, yours proposal and Benja's proposal, right? You can implement it on top. So, Jaco, just to clarify, like we discussed your proposal like a week or two ago, and basically it's the same, right? So it's like foundation of, it's like current state of things, but coded like in a better way.
Yeah, meaning
okay.
it only solves the idea that we only execute once, and
Yeah.
the original way we had solved that was with weak maps and etc. And now we it's formally built in that we only execute each once. And the downside of that is that we have to send each field to the to the payload that's keeping track, the object that's keeping track of when it's ready, and then when it's all ready, it has to be rebuilt. There's a faster implementation that I have in mind rather than the one that exists now, but it's it's going to be probably slower, I think, from the get-go than just delivering, than not rebuilding anything and just executing as we go. But basically, it's the current state of things without branching, but implementing that without weak maps. And I showed here how you can get deduplication. You can move forward in different directions, maybe based on how we want to go decide here. But it's really more of an implementation than a concrete proposal, like we mentioned earlier.
One quick question: labels is still here, right? We still have labels.
Yes, we can show here that, and basically the other change besides not branching is that different defers at the same level and with the same label or with no label are merged, and that's
okay.
And that's sort of to make sure that the path plus label is now 100% unique.
Yeah, so I'm like totally for it.
Just to be clear, that is distinct from what I'm currently proposing.
Can you explain, Benja, what's the distinction?
Yes, so Yakov was just saying that effectively the defers at a given path merge in his proposal. In my latest proposal, 2C, they don't. So two separate defers would not merge at the same path.
I do. Is it true that for either proposal, like we could decide to do it either way? I don't think that it's really I don't think that should be like a differentiating factor. I don't think it matters too much for either proposal. It's not, I don't think it's core to like the implementation, but I think what is different is that the shape of how we're sending the data. I feel like Yakov's proposal could easily be modified to not merge the labels that are the same, or Benji's proposal could be modified to merge labels that are the same. But I think that what's core to figure out is like, do we want to try to maintain the shape of the fragment that's deferred, or do we want to guarantee that fields are only sent once, even the intermediary objects? Do either of you disagree with that?
Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I realize that I haven't really brought anything to the table that's new. I mean, I showed an implementation, and I think about it more in terms of what features do we want? Do we want no branching? And so that check, like I think everyone agrees with that. Yeah. And then there are certain things that might be easier with my implementation / spec algorithm, but again, the implementation that I have doesn't have to match the spec algorithm. It could be different. So the way I think about it is more like we have to figure out what features. Do we want to get rid of branching? I think everyone would agree. Then we have to decide, what the shape of the payloads is, as you're saying. Do we want pending and completed? Maybe probably. How do we want null bubbling to work? Are we going to never allow inconsistencies, or are we going to allow them? And then how are we going to deal with that, that filtering or whatnot? So I totally agree that there's sort of nothing new in my proposal, and some things will be easier in my implementation, and something maybe at some point we might have to scrap it. So I don't think we should evaluate basically anything that I've done on its own merits. It's just a question of what features do we want, and maybe my implementation will be bad if we want a certain combination, but I don't think that's a reason to adopt my implementation. It is what it is.
Yeah, so I think that
So question here, just to clarify, because we're discussing already future development work. Are we okay with measuring what Yakov proposed as a baseline, not as a finished state, but as a baseline to measure every other proposal as to make diff smaller, basically, for every other proposal, and to have to allow people to use stuff that we're discussing, execution ones, for example. It's I think it's really important.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
What about
my
you?
hesitation is that Yakov's proposal, Yakov's solution, great that we have one, and having a working solution is brilliant to experiment with. But the intent for my one is that it effectively builds out from the current status of the spec, which presumably is also the current status of GraphQL.js. So I would expect that the final diff against the current GraphQL.js or a GraphQL.js that doesn't even support stream and defer would be less in total than implementing Yakov's changes and then implementing the ones required for my difference on top. Effectively, all of the behaviors that Yakov has written into his proposal the equivalence with my proposal would just be a natural extension of how the spec is written. It's just a part of the field merging. It just properties that emerge from the field merging approach in a quite straightforward manner. And I'm not sure whether that is necessarily true for the way that Yakov's done it. But to be honest, I haven't read Yakov's implementation, so I'm not entirely sure.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I'm not sure, it's a funny situation now because right now we have a version of incremental delivery in GraphQL.js. I don't think meaning Benji's eventual version, I don't think the diff will be smaller if we merge mine in, if we then change it all together towards Benji's, so it helps us maybe only with the examples, like the test examples. But again, the payload format is going to be so different. We're going to have to change so many lines of code anyway. I think we might be more productive just trying to decide which features we want, or can we as a subgroup come to a consensus about which features we want to present to the working group at the next meeting, especially what Benji mentioned last time. It would be nice to decide about sort of error boundaries, Ivan's suggestion, all that stuff.
Okay, in this case, let's focus on I think what would help, because right now I'm I was on all this meeting and I'm confused. I didn't do homework. I didn't read the current status of the discussion, but at the same time I'm confused what's Benji proposal to C or to B, or what property it has, and in reality it's it's every proposal have different answer on set of 8 questions probably. Do you have duplication of leaves? Do you have duplication of intermediate objects? Do you keep shape of fragments together? And set of other questions. So what would be helpful is to have a set of questions and table. I think it will help other people, bigger working group, to understand what we're discussing.
So the original point of this presentation that Rob has open was to try and explain some of the various concepts that we're talking about. So if you go right to the very beginning, Rob, and step through from there, it's talking about things like the fragment consistency, that's explaining to the working group what one of the problems is that we aim to solve, and so on and so forth as we go through different of them. Then it was to look at some of the solutions, and then to look at my one. Now, what we actually have on the agenda for the April working group at the moment is field merging approach to incremental delivery. So it was effectively, or originally, my plan was just to present an alternative solution. Since then, we've evolved quite significantly. Rob came up with a counter proposal. Yakov's got his own build that tries to achieve some of the similar goals. And so there was no 2A, B, and C when I first wrote this. There was just a option 2, which is the field merging approach. So I'm cool with moving this stuff around, choosing what we present. But I definitely think that, as you were saying, having a way of figuring out what these questions are is really, really critical. And then figuring out what the different solutions mean. When we did, as you know, Ivan, when we did the interface input unions working group, we effectively came up with a whole bunch of different criteria, and they were all things that different people wanted. And none of the solutions that we came up with had a yes 100% agreement in every single section. I mean, that's one of the reasons why maybe that particular thing hasn't been completed yet. But I think there's a lot of like there are definitely contradictory aims here. For example, one aim, perfectly reasonable aim, could be to have the fragments delivered as whole, like atomic finished objects. And another aim could be to never deliver leaves twice. Those two conflict with each other. You can't have both of those. You have to have one or the other. But that doesn't mean that they can't both be goals.
Yeah, one quick suggestion, because I think there is a value in discussing them. For example, don't really understand. Yeah, maybe like for very, very primitive clients, but like for me, maybe I'm not getting something, but for me, having like fragment delivered as one blob is not that the big criteria. Ability to have parallel delivery, meaning like through some mechanism, labels or fragment aliases or something, that you have one fragment delivered faster than another one is important. But either client gets fragment as one blob or it gets it through couple increments, it's less important. And also, when we had like working group discussion, you remember I had like a proposal to also split response between response to a fragment in couple of chunks. And main opposition wasn't that it's break fragment shapes. The biggest opposition was from Matt saying like we should not send useless payloads. So like we should not send payloads that don't allow client to render something. So we should not send like each field separately, basically. Other than that, like I think everybody was okay with, or at least like I didn't heard any strong opposition and people saying like fragment should be delivered just as one blob in response.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it doesn't mean that we couldn't still write it up as a goal and then as a working group say, right, this is no longer a goal and here are the reasons for that, which you've laid out quite well. Having a resource like that, like we did for the input unions, would be very valuable. Saying why something that might seem to someone who's not gone through all of the huge amount of work that we all have, especially Rob, giving them that kind of context and saying, you might expect it to come through as a big payload, but it turns out that's not important because of this, and this, and actually these are more important criteria, is a valuable resource. Because if I'm not mistaken, the current version of stream and defer, like the version that Apollo are using, right, is using the branching approach. Yeah,
and like zero matching. So nothing is like deduplicate with initial response, nothing deduplicate between labels. Everything is like as is. So the most primitive one in a sense.
So we are basically taking one of the core features of that original stream and defer and we're throwing it away. So explaining why we've done that and like having it as an original goal that has since been overridden by other goals, I think is really important.
One also important thing, like Yakov work proves that there is two different things. There is like execution deduplication and response deduplication. And when we start with thing, in my brain, it was like batch together. So the price was like huge. Like what currently in GraphQL.js, did you like? It created a huge problem because of two things, like execution duplication and payload duplication. And I see execution duplication is like huge problem. Payload duplication is also a problem, but not as huge. Yeah, just want to clarify. And Yakov PR shows it's like two separate things basically. So even if, yeah, so I think like the whole like circle makes sense, even if we like abandon everything, but that we done since, but just match like execution deduplication, that will be already like huge win and justify always like process of discussion. Because like execution duplication is semantically it's like bad thing.
Well, I mean, you raise a good point there, which is effectively the removal of the execution duplication could be done now on top of the existing stream and defer without breaking it, right? So you should probably consider doing that anyway, but that shouldn't have any real impact on our spec work, which is, you know, going the route of going a route where that shouldn't be an issue to start with, I hope. So what I'm saying is you should go ahead and merge something that fixes that into GraphQL.js because it won't break stream and defer that anyone's already using.
Yeah, it's great idea. Like actually like Yakov, is it possible to split like execution deduplication from field merging? Because I hate to see
so,
like
I set it up in two different commits. I think it's not. There's a whole section in the code that, I mean, there's some, you know, to-dos left basically. So I wouldn't want anyone to really use it for production. I think it would be great if we got people to use it and to give us more test cases, etc. But I don't know. I mean, it's certainly not ready for a production use, but I think it's ready for more testing.
Yeah. So it's like less ready for production use than current status of main, or it's so we're making it less reliable for production compared to like current main or not?
I would say definitely less reliable. Definitely.
Okay. Yeah. In this case, it's yeah. So if you can separate, if it's not like huge amount of work, since you said it's separate, maybe you create a separate PR and we. Like Rob, for example, can review it, and because he's bigger expert on this piece of code than me, myself, and I will try to find the time to also look in it, and maybe we'll solve production issue and merge it, and it will be clear win, like, and hopefully it will like help even people like using current state, like for example Apollo, like GraphQL tools, or like whoever is also using current state of stream defer.
Cool.
Okay, I mean, I'm glad to give a pass to try to fix the holes I know about.
Okay.
Just to circle back a little bit to the previous discussion that you were discussing, Ivan, you were saying how the execution and the payload delivery are effectively separate, as proven by Yakov's proposal. And effectively, what I'm saying is that is true. We have found that to be true, and we could definitely do the execution separately and then deliver with duplicates or without duplicates. But what is, I think, the main difference with the way that I'm trying to do my proposal is that the delivery of the payloads, the deduplication of the leaves, is a artifact of the execution deduplication. So it flows out of that. It's not a separate thing. It is part of the same algorithm. It doesn't happen as a second phase. It's just a property of how the whole thing works. So it effectively pulls it back together again, but still gets us the full leaf deduplication on delivery and completely no duplicate execution.
Right.
Yeah,
I think that like both what you're proposing and what Yakov implemented, it's like during execution, it's breaking down the individual fields of executing them once and keeping track of which payloads, of which defers they belong to. And Benji's is then sending that data just as it was executed, whereas Yakov's is reassembling it back into the payload shape to match what the defer fragment looks like. Is that accurate? And I think that the difference between them, what's most interesting is what happens when there's non-nullable fields and null bubbling happens. Where because of the way that it gets reassembled back in Yakov's implementation, you could end up with the same field being sent twice, first with a null and then again with the data, because it bubbled here, but it didn't bubble there. And if you're trying to write it back up into a single object that looks the same, into like one reconcilable object, now you have a conflict and you have to choose how to handle it. Whereas with Benji's approach, I think that we would have, like, you couldn't make that choice because once that field is already sent, it has been sent and you can't send another value for the same thing. And I think that that could be good, or it could be bad, maybe because you have a client that is rendering fragments more directly, and maybe it could render that C being null in one place of the client and the C having data in another place. But maybe that adds more complexity for clients that don't want to do that, and maybe that's not really that much of a valid use case anyway.
So in what I'm thinking about for 2C for solving this problem now, and to be clear, this problem came up after I wrote out what 2C is. What I think would happen is that effectively, if there was a null bubble that happened later, then it would effectively invalidate that entire fragment that had been deferred. So that entire fragment would now error out and wouldn't deliver any of its data if it bubbles past any sort of shared or previously sent field. So there would never be a case where there was a null sent and then there wanted to be an object later. That wouldn't happen. It would be more that there was an object sent and then that object wanted to be made null later. That's what would potentially want to happen, and that's what we would forbid by just blowing up the entire fragment.
I've actually, from within my existing solution, I demonstrated how you could have not branching, but sort of independence. But I don't, in terms of goals that conflict, I think that goal, if it is a goal even, conflicts really with the idea of deduplication, because then it's like really difficult for clients to figure out, what has been sent, what hasn't, what they can rely on, how everything fits together. And I think the safest option, for this kind of error case is basically to adopt exactly what Benji proposed. So, meaning I think that if we should always take the initial, we should just have consistency, and all nulls should travel forward, and any new nulls that can't travel backwards should result in the payload erroring. I mean, I so basically I've come to the same conclusion, but not because the algorithm that I have says you have to, but I just think that's the best idea.
And an interesting thing is you can think of it a little bit like the client-controlled nullability. So you can say, like, if you have a deferred fragment that overlaps multiple layers, where it overlaps things that have already sent, you can think of each element of that chain having the bang, the exclamation point modifier to say this is now non-nullable, and that would be effectively what causes the fragment to blow up. That's just an analogy. It's not like concretely how it would be implemented. Just wanted to give another way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. Thank you.
So if we are doing deduplication, then is there a reason why we would want to try to maintain the payload structure?
You mean if you have a fragment ABC that's deferred and you've already delivered A and B, would you want to still deliver A, B, and C with the defer? Is that what you're asking?
Sorry, no. I'm just asking basically, like, is there any benefit for having, this type of payload structure that matches the deferred fragment?
Like everything, all the incremental delivery for particular fragment to be scoped into one incremental element, right? It's what you're asking. Is that in what you selected, everything from a fragment should fit in one data, right?
Right. Yeah. I guess what I'm thinking now is that the two paths to go down are so we don't want execution duplication. I think that's just objectively bad now. There's no good reason to have it, since we proved that it doesn't affect response duplication. Now, the next question is, do we want response duplication or not? And I think that if we decide that we don't, then I don't think there's a benefit to trying to maintain this the layout of the payloads matching what the deferred fragment looks like. I think because if stuff is being deduplicated, you have to keep track of everything and merge it back together to get something useful. So I feel like this is only useful if we're not doing duplication, if we're not doing deduplication, and then clients could just look at this payload and render it directly. But if you have to keep track of all the previous payloads and build it up again, then we might as well rule this out and go with the fields being sent individually.
Well, the fields being sent individually does give us a lot of potential extra metadata about each field, the path to each field. So in the way I thought about it is that we have a deduplicated response that, other than the deduplication of leaves or objects that are sent, we're basically batching, and we're batching in ways that are predictable. And so I think that's highly desirable to batch responses. And then the question is, do we want to do some of to provide objects that will have to do a deep merge, or do we only want to provide objects where the client has to do individual mergers on multiple payloads? I see that as a difference. Maybe we don't want to batch too much if for some reason we think it's bad to have a deep merge. I think that was one of the points that Benji raised, or one of the pros of one of his solutions. I'm not sure why that is a pro, but if it is a pro, then we should explore it for sure.
Yeah. Can I create a criteria for that? can we call it like greedy delivery? It's what Matt always like talks about and emphasize in previous discussion, that we send as many like stuff in one payload as either ready or makes sense for like from fragment view. So like yeah, as Yakov said, like we send stuff separately either for deduplication or because it's like fit in fragment or like specific fragment or specific fragment with a label. Yes. And also before we go into like types of merging, I want to
But the greedy delivery, I think that's something that we did already rule out, where in Benji's proposal, even though that the fields are executed separately and they're in separate incremental payloads, we're not going to deliver any of them until everything for that fragment is ready. So they all are coming in the same actual response.
Yeah, just wanted to emphasize it's like separate criteria, because even if Benji's proposal as a whole, like for some reason it did not pass like main working group or somebody, like we need that criteria.
Yeah.
Because basically I propose like replacing this criteria of having the same shape for a fragment with like 3 criteria. One criteria is that with greedy thing. Second criteria is like client need to understand when particular fragment is fully delivered. So like we need to have like some mechanisms for a client to understand like this fragment is satisfied. And third criteria, client need to know which fields, like client need to know particular element in incremental belongs to particular fragment. So like when client do merging, client needs to understand which chunk is like belong to what. So I think it's not, we can replace like with complicated criteria of having same shape with like free easier to achieve criteria, especially like last two is pretty easy to do, like with pending or with like some ID mechanism.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I think what I should do for before the next meeting, I hope that I'll have time to do it, is I mean, we had discussed last time, like these are guarantees that we can't break. There was a list of them, and we had added one more to the list last time, and that's what completely rules out execution duplication. So I want to try and do that and try and come up with like, these are the other requirements that we've had. Not necessarily requirements, things that we want to try to achieve. See how different options line up, and then hope that that's enough to like get everyone in the working group on the same page as us.
Yeah, and what's interesting is parallel Go. We can like do execution deduplication on current stage of or state of GraphQL.js, because yeah, it will benefit entire community.
Yeah.
Now.
So I've just shared a link in the chat to the solution criteria for the input union RFC. And in this, effectively, we came up with a list of individual goals. Basically, we didn't really throw any goals out, or at least not initially. We just wrote down what each individual person felt wanted to be the goals. We grouped them together. We gave them good names. And then we evaluated each of those goals against each of the solutions. But more importantly, you'll notice that each of them has a criteria score. So if you look at like solution A, for example, GraphQL should contain a polymorphic input type, that has a criteria score of gold medal, which represented 1, like super important. There were, however, other ones that were less important, like a member type, maybe a leaf type, which was E, that had a lower criteria weighting. So the things that we as a group feel are actually less important, we can still write them down as criteria, we can still evaluate things against them, but we can give them like a lower weighting. So if it fails for that, but it passes for a more important one, then it might still be, you know, better to choose that solution rather than one that, you know, passes the other way around. This was a really valuable exercise that we did as part of the input unions group. And I would love to see a simple resource like this, where each of these is described in very, you know, like 1 sentence, 2 sentences, maybe with a couple of objections saying why we shouldn't aim for that or why it's not important.
Yeah, and more people can like provide feedback because especially like client developers or people can suggest a different solution, alternative one, because right now it's hard. We like have more or less consensus, but about what criteria is. So for people outside this group to propose solution, it's currently it's like really hard for somebody outside this group to propose solution. Making this document or iterate on some solution would be helpful. And also, Rob, to make your life easier, you can write like stuff that minimal stuff or stuff that you feel strong about, and if somebody have a strong opinion about some other criteria, this person can submit PR to add that criteria. It would be fair instead of like putting the whole thing on you.
Yeah, I want to try and come up with something like this. The only thing is I feel like we have a like we're talking about it as Benji's proposal, Yakov's implementation, but I feel like it's really like a matrix of possible features that could be combined in different ways. But I think that I just need to spend some time thinking through it and seeing if I could organize it into something like this. I'm not sure that I'll be able to do it before the meeting on Thursday. So maybe we should postpone that, but I'll try to do some work today and tomorrow and see how far I get.
You don't necessarily have to write up what the solutions are and evaluate them against this. That came later. The first step is really just writing down what the aims are.
Yeah, okay.
And Ivan is right. Like, if people have complaints that you don't necessarily agree with, it's their responsibility to add them to the document. And also, if they have other goals that you don't necessarily agree with, then it's their responsibility to add it to the document. I'd be happy to sit with you for, you know, half an hour, and maybe scratch out some of this in a Google Doc, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, we've got about 10 minutes left. with regard to what we're talking about at the working group, do you think a much shorter version of the presentation that we've been currently using to propose my different solutions would work as a good onboarding there? Do you think it covers some of the main topics? Is there anything obviously missing from that? It needs explanation, right? So the slides are not meant to be self-explanatory, just to be clear.
Yeah, no, I think this is really good. And
one cool
yeah,
update
I think this
would
is
be-
really good to show why we should go from what is currently merged to main right now, which is duplication and branching, to not doing execution duplication. Then I think, like, as a result of this, like, there's still options that we have to consider. We probably can just rule out 2A and 2B. But yeah, but I think that's a good way to, like, show everyone why we don't want what we have right now.
Cool.
Yeah, one thing I suggest, like, to have also a positive note and say we figure out execution deduplication. I think it's like positive, and it's like, because from outside maybe it look like we're stuck, but it's actually measurable thing that is achieved, like, in whole this discussion. And it's totally, like, for me, it's like totally made it worth to say, like, you have a guarantee that you receive the same, even, like, yeah, and don't have like a problem with semantics or locks or like locking the entire operation for incremental. I think, like, it's huge progress. So I would share that as like, as maybe before or after discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. Yeah, so is there anything else that we want to talk about now? All right, cool. I'll reach out to Benji. We can schedule some time to go through the criteria. And yeah, see you guys on Thursday then.
Awesome. See you all on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, bye.